very lovely to see you all here. Isn't it lovely to be face to face? It never gets old. And really, really nice that there's more people here than 3, which is what there was whenever I looked at that little app the last time at Shed. That's going to be intimate. And I know at least 2 people in here, so that's always good as well. And one of them is not allowed to ask any questions at all. No, you can. Just not cruel interview ones. Hello, come on in. Have a seat, have a seat. All right, so we have 30 minutes and 10 minutes for questions. Let's go. It says on the blurb that I worked at UCA, which I did up until November last year. Is the clicker working? Where do I click? Or I can just do that. All right. Put that down so I don't get distracted by it. Okay, so me now I'm working at Queen Mary, Education and Recognition Advisor. I teach on the PG CAP and mentor on the fellowship programs, so we do training workshops for staff, basically. But up until when I put in the proposal for this, for BALEAP, I was head of EAP at UCA, and yeah, and I've been working in EFL and EAP for all my life, which is a very long time now. All right, so what we're doing here today, I want to give you a little bit of context, which is to talk about the research that my colleague and I did at UCA into the academics' intercultural competence and whether they could scaffold knowledge, scaffold learning effectively for their international students. I want to discuss briefly the rationale for why the EAP team took this on, and examine the effectiveness of 4 EAP-led sort of interventions that we designed to address the knowledge and skills gaps that came up as a result of the findings of the research. And then some recommendations for next steps, future plans. I'm very informal, by the way, so just if I'm going too fast or something that's not clear, just shout, please. Okay. All right, so some context. I was at UCA, 2020, and my line manager at the time was responsible for internationalization of the curriculum and an action plan for this. Okay, UCA is a very, very small university, 6,000 students, 2,000 international students, but of course not evenly spread across programs. So for example, in the business school, I think 75 to 80% of the students were international. So they went from none to everybody really, really quickly. So when I first started there, this had just happened. So that happened, and then they employed me. And so it was like going before a firing squad. Like, okay, let's see what we can do. So it was really rapid. The staff were completely unprepared and really unequipped. Bless them. I mean, it wasn't their fault. It just happened to them, you know. We identified fairly quickly, we being me and the EAP team, identified fairly quickly there was a clear knowledge gap, especially around language levels, students' language levels, and the fact that maybe they needed to scaffold or grade their language. We knew this just anecdotally and informally from sitting in on taught sessions, for example, attending tutorials, wandering around in the studios. The nice thing about being in a creative arts university is that you can just wander into the studio. You know, it's not like you're interrupting a lecture. You know, you have that, so the space is, I don't know, it's more open in that sense. The academics are a bit more open to us sort of wandering. In fact, encouraged it. So we'd sit in on taught sessions. We taught ESAP, so teaching across all the courses. We saw some horrific assessment briefs. I'm sure you've all, you know what I'm talking about. Some that are clear and some that are, oh dear God Almighty, I don't understand it. All right. Conversations with lecturers, especially around language level. My students can't speak English. Like, I tested them, I know they can. And I regularly got asked for Chinese interpreters. Like I had a cupboard of, a little cupboard under my desk. Hang on, let me just find one for you. I just, all the time, it's like, why would it be me? I used to then offer to be the Chinese interpreter. Like, I'll be a Chinese interpreter, I'll speak a word in Mandarin. I used to just go to the tutorials and grade and rephrase. So we knew this anecdotally, but we decided to do some research to get some data on it. Something we all know, but to get some data on it so we could do something with it. So we did some research into academics' intercultural competence and whether they could scaffold language effectively, whether they could convey knowledge effectively to their students, and then to see if those things were correlated. So that was our question. That's what we got. Again, it's a small university, so that was a decent enough return. You know, it was just quite all right. So we're happy with that. It was enough to work with. So we did the survey, we did the questionnaires, and then did 10 in-depth interviews. You can have the slides afterwards. I don't know if they go up on the BALEAP website, right? Maybe? Yeah. I guess so. You haven't been modified too much. I moved one thing around. All right, so this is the framework that we used to sort of put all of this, the framework we used for the research from Livermore. Very simple. If you haven't seen it before, it's really simple. So idea of starting with drive. So you want to learn about other cultures. You are aware about other cultures, aware of that there's some similarities and differences. Then being able to do something with it. That's the bottom, right? So being able to read a situation and go, aha, this is because of that, and then, doing something with it. And then preparing for it, having a flexible repertoire of responses. So the idea being you would move around. So if you're you had very high cultural intelligence, you'd be over here in the action. So that was our framework for the questionnaires and for the interviews. And that's what we found. So most people had decent enough drive and knowledge, 95%, happy enough with that. But only 30% were all the way around in action. Only 30% were fully competent, if you like, in this framework. Common traits that they had were they were staff who'd worked overseas. This wasn't just the EAP tutors, right? This was across the academics, all academics. They'd worked overseas, they spoke a second language, or they'd just been teaching international students for longer and had worked out some ways to do this. Right? But then, kind of scarily, 20% of people didn't even think about maybe having to adapt their teaching or adjust their teaching in any way. So their common traits were maybe they were monolingual, less confident in multilingual context, maybe new to teaching. What was very common in UCA was we had a lot of staff from industry, so like fashion designers, fashion buyers, marketers. Very, very little exposure to this world. Like, what are we going to do? Right. This was also just interesting for me, like how did they scaffold? So those who were scaffolding, the subject lecturers were doing it with additional materials, putting in videos, putting in things with signs and symbols, whereas the EAP tutors are doing all the stuff that EAP tutors do with language and learning to learn, so mind mapping and navigating a text and all of those things. So again, pretty obviously, but we needed data, and we had data. Because it drove then the internationalization action plan. So obviously, one doesn't necessarily equate the other. You have to know what you're doing. You have to have tools to get around to CQ strategy in action. Learning a language, we know. But number 3 and number 4 were the two that I was focused in on. Boom. Need for knowledge exchange and collaboration. A need for staff development and support. It's like, I want to do that, I want to do that. Mostly, my motivation was, you must all be in the same, you must have all been in the same situation where it's deficit model all the time. What's wrong with my students? My students can't speak English, I need a Chinese interpreter. No, you really don't. It's like, okay, my team are working beautifully, my in-sessional team are working beautifully, I'm working great with the students. Can we do a little something with the staff? And maybe we can all learn a little, so we can upskill everybody. So that was my motivation for champing at the bit to get involved with this. So I did a little bit of research. That's a very skimpy literature review, but I did a bit of research just to get, to back up that it should be me, because I had to put in a proposal that our team should lead on it. So thankfully, happily, of course, there was some nice research out there that said, oh yes, they need professional development, and that these were particularly useful to me. So needing to be interculturally competent and needing to modify your language or be aware of your language. So those were really useful. But the scaffolding one's dead good if you ever have to do any, if you've done that paper, that's really useful. if you ever have to do any staff training yourselves. It was a way of organising scaffolding. So anyway, those were sort of there to, because I had to put in a proposal to get on with this stuff to do it. So, things that you all know, things that we're all really good at, right? Especially if you're doing ESAP and you're across all the courses, and you see some project briefs, some assessment briefs would be brilliant, some are just really, really difficult. Some academic texts are, would bring tears to your eyes, especially fine arts. Oh my goodness me. Anything that's like very, conceptual or abstract. I think, if I can't read it, how are those poor students able to manage this? My team were really experienced, so I was really happy they knew about like IELTS levels and CFR, and they were really happy with that. And we'd all come through the language school mill, so we all knew about rolling intake on a Monday and having to make new groups on a Tuesday and get the group together, and that was a nice thing to tell academic staff when they got new straggly students. It's like, hang on a minute, let me tell you about rolling intake. Don't be complaining about one new student. So, these are the things that I wanted to do. This was me and my line manager working this, plotting on this, if you like. So the first and simplest thing was to set up some staff development workshops. Went in with the first one, communicating across cultures, and then I had two more sort of lined up based on the outcomes of the research, right? So, and that was based on the outcomes of the research. And the group dynamics was based on just observations of what classes looked like, what tutorials might look like, and crits were all the European students were over here, and all the Chinese students were over here sitting, and huddled, and nobody was talking to one another. So, come on. And so then the idea of collaborating was behind sort of number 2. Number 3 was like, okay, well we see the tutors all the time. We're in their world all the time. Can they come and watch us teach? Will we learn something? Can we sort that out? And then number 4 was just, we'll do all the things. Having seen so many terrible assessment briefs, so we can maybe help you modify those, make them a bit more accessible. So that was big, grand plans. But all went into this action plan that had to be reported up to senior leaders. So we started off with this, that was basically the content there. Started off with this first one, communicating across cultures. I went to the learning development team, said, hey, can we do this? And put in maybe my proposal, and it got approved. And they're like, we'll run one as a trial. Okay. The second one was like, why is scaffolding necessary? I really wanted them to understand like language levels. So we did some work in that workshop, taught them a bit about IELTS levels, and your students are here, and this is fluent, and this is where your students are, and look what it says about scaffolding. And then the group dynamics, basically because they really needed it. They seemed to be afraid to interact with the students in some way. The students didn't know how to interact with each other, and everybody's just a bit siloed. So, this is what happened. We ran that first one, so we put it on, and it was the most popular workshop she'd ever had. It was like, clearly there was a need, and so we put this workshop on, and she goes, they sign up on the website. She went, it's really full. It's full. We do another one. Yeah, we'll do another one. And then the feedback came back, and it was really positive. And she's on the phone, like, come on, we'll do them every 6 weeks. Like, well, can I do these two? With the academic staff as well? It was tricky to set up, but once it was set up, it was done. I just logged in and did my workshops. It was fine. It took a bit of time to plan it initially. I'd got a couple of students to help me with the communicating across cultures one, so that was really nice. Then they got the student voice, and it wasn't just me blah-blahing. Students talking about problems they'd had in induction week, and problems they'd had with different international students. There was a Chinese girl talking about being afraid to talk to the Indian students, what could the staff do to help, this kind of stuff. So I was learning and development's most favourite person, and we did 194 staff, came in just that short time. Most of them attended communicating across cultures. Most of them were professional services staff because academics are tricky to pin down in these things. But they did come. And it did get spread around. One person would come from a department, and then the next time you ran the workshop, there'd be 2 more from that same department, and it moved around like that. And it was really nice because UCA has 4 campuses, so they could hear from each other. They had a chance to sort of share stories. What was it like in this campus? And what was it like over here? And what were you doing? And how was this? And they could share their experiences, their problems with, you know, their socio-cultural, you know, issues, if you like, and their experiences and how they were solving things. And learning development, thankfully, they managed all the feedback, which was great. The feedback surveys, but it was all super positive, like uniformly. They needed it. It hadn't been done before, and I used to send out the slides to everybody that participated, like directly emailed them, and then that brought back, you know, responses as well. So that gave me some nice extra sort of anecdotal feedback. One thing as I was preparing for this, one thing I realised then as well was, so I'd sort of branded them. They all had kind of the same branding. But what I think happened then is academic staff looked at the 2 that were specifically for them and went, oh, I did that other one. It's the same. You know, so it needed a clear, you know, part 1, part 2, part 3, or, you know, clearly branded separately, so that they could see that it wasn't a repeat. You know, it was a different thing and distinct and for them. All right. So some nice sample quotes. We did try to push it to be part of staff induction, but there's so many e-learning, so much e-learning that people have to do. So yeah, I'm not going to get that one passed. But they like practical help always, right? It's easy enough for us to go in with a bag of tricks and go this, bum 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 bum. Here we go. That was the one I was most interested in. That lady emailed me back and told me that. So okay, good. Has it still changed? Right. So the idea of co-teaching and co-creating, again, these are not perfect things. There's lessons learned here. This is evaluating. So I did 5 different sessions over that sort of year-long period. So the idea was always just to collaborate and get the staff in and, you know, try and create and then teach something together. But these were all sessions that I developed with academic staff. The first one was developed with the business school, and it was like, our students can't do this and this and this and this. Okay, well, let's make a thing together. Let's make a workshop together. So one was understanding norms and expectations. What's independent study? Where's my timetable? What does that mean to be a student in the UK? The second one was sort of research, basics of research. What's primary research? What's secondary? What does that mean, my own opinion here? And then the last one was plagiarism and academic integrity. The art crits and the plagiarism one, so these 2 here, were my most successful because the colleagues I was working with, I knew them better, and they were more. Our relationship was more confident, if you like, and so we just sort of naturally sort of taught between us. You know, it just shifted around. So I was leading it, but the dynamic was flexible. With the art crits, those of you teaching in creative arts, which at least one person in here does, maybe some others. In an art crit, students have to bring their work so far and display it, and then their peers go around and give feedback on it, right? And what usually happens is students come along and go with post-it notes and put the post-it note. This was a graphic design workshop and graphic design course, and so they'd put their posters, you know, so far, project so far around the wall, and they go around with their post-it notes and stick their feedback on. And what usually happens is people write, it's nice, it's good. That's really unuseful. So we came up with a list of things and ways to give constructive feedback, right? So I really like how you did that, because I think this is successful because this is interesting. Would it be even more interesting if, you know, have you ever thought about, and so we practiced doing that with some like really silly ways to just relax them into giving this kind of feedback. I think we're doing it with hair. Oh, I really like your hair. Have you ever considered dyeing it green? Those kind of stuff. But it relaxed them, you know, we're using the language. And then they had their post-its and went around, and it was a little bit better. And that was good. And everyone was happy. The plagiarism one was a way of getting around the hurdle of not having time to mark formative assessments. So the tutor wanted the students to engage with, turn it in the similarity report, so that whenever they turned in their final assessment, it wouldn't be full of, it wouldn't be full of plagiarism. Like, how do I use this similarity report? So we came up with this idea where I would do 2 workshops with them. One explaining how to use the similarity report and what the benefit of it was, and how to read it, and that they should use this. And then they would submit their drafts. And nobody was marking them formatively, but they just submitted them. And I got to go through them and pick out pieces where they could be improved. I mean, we sentence, we couple of tiny paragraphs, little pieces, anonymized them, and put them in the second workshop, and we corrected them together. So they got a tiny piece of their work corrected, but they could see the benefit of it, like, because it was their work. So it was pretty successful, actually. And it got around a hurdle of no time to mark formative assessments for the tutor, so she was happy. And the intercultural group work with engaging with the reading list kind of just was what it was. Here's some, here's the reading list. We kind of did jigsaw reading, I think, is what we did there. I've forgotten that one. I kind of did jigsaw reading, I think. And the intercultural group, 10 minutes, good. That's good timing. The intercultural group work was basically trying to get students to talk to each other nicely. So why are we doing group work? Okay, why might you not understand? Why might we not understand each other? So not everybody has the same accent, ladies and gentlemen, so it's okay to ask. And just sort of, and getting them to think a bit about the cultural barriers that they had among themselves, and then getting them to do some group tasks together. That worked beautifully. It was a really, really nice workshop, actually. Repeated that a few times. Because they understood, why are we doing group work? Okay, all right. How do we work together nicely? What happens if there's a problem? But they enjoyed that cultural thing because they hadn't really done that before either. But anyway, so those are the 5 sessions I got to do. And this was sort of thoughts on those. Students were really happy with them. Like the tutors thankfully did the post-workshop feedback. They did a little survey for me. But the lecturers wanted all the sessions repeated, so they were all repeated at least once. Those How to Be a Student ones went around 3 times, I think, because we had 2 lots of intake, September and January. So they just went around. Obviously much more effective when you're co-teaching, because then it's both people saying the thing and they listen a bit more, right? I think a lot of that was to do with the, how close, whether the relationship that we had, the teacher and the lecturer and I had, was close, like how long we'd known each other and stuff. And one of the intercultural group work sessions, the idea was, we've planned this, we're going to teach this together, and he wandered off somewhere to do his marking for an hour. It's like, hang on a minute, mate, I'm not covering your class here. So again, when we talked about it, but didn't write it down because I'd assumed that because the other teachers had done this, that he would do it. But so you need to make that really super clear from the start. So I'm going to do this bit. These slides are you. This is you. Maybe that's obvious, but because it had worked nicely before, I just, I'd assumed. The peer observation went a lot less well. We only had mostly because there was not enough time in the day to do all of these things. I would do it very differently next time, but the EAP tutors were in all the time observing, right? There was no problem, and they were happy. The art tutors were always happy for us to wander around. But for subject lecturers, one of the main problems there is the roll-on sessional contracts. There are very few who are permanent, so you're trying to get a wee bit of their valuable time and get them to come and observe a lesson. So the 2 or I think 3 who did this were already people who were very, very engaged and didn't necessarily need any more. They weren't the ones I was worried about. So what if I was doing this again, what will come to like future plans bit in a second. If I was doing it again, they'd need a sort of self-reflection, really. Like what, things to look for. Because I sat with so many lecturers informally in tutorials and stuff, being their Chinese interpreter, and they weren't sort of picking up on what I was doing with language, because why would they, I suppose, right? Why would they? So it kind of needs, how did she check understanding? It kind of needs some of those questions to help sort of guide them through it. I think it could be done, but with quite a lot of structure. This was a mad thing to do. Look at the time. Look what else we were doing in July. What else does the EAP team do in July? And this is when this work came our way, and I didn't want to say no to it because I thought, this is great, we get to do this. Just say yes to all the things. So me and my pre-sessional coordinator nearly killed ourselves getting that done. It was 12 new programs. It was the program specs and the module handbooks. And some of them were okay, thank God, but some of them were diabolical. And it was very, very labour intensive. But it did get us lots of kudos with the senior leadership team. We were known then, but it's not very developmental for subject lecturers. What did they learn? We were just, they wrote their thing, and it was, we fixed it. Like, here, this student's broken, their English isn't good enough, fix it. But it will be, I think there's scope to do a nice workshop, right? What should an accessible assessment brief look like? I think that's where there's scope. All right. Obviously, measuring impact. So short term, yes, everything's successful. Yes, in short term, anything that was completed, we're all saying it was helpful. Then medium term is, is it helpful, or are they doing anything about it, or do they just say, yay, that was great, and walk out and continue, right? So what I'm going to do to measure the medium and longer term, so there's about half a dozen tutors who I know have said to me, my teaching has changed. And so I'd like to do some interviews with them and say in what way, and document that, so we can see. It's part of the project I'm working on Queen Mary as well. People doing the PG cap going, yay, my teaching has changed. Like, has it really though? Has it really? Let's see. All right. If I was doing this again, or if I was recommending what to do, one of the most powerful ways that you can get involved with academics and start talking to them about their teaching is through that fellowship. Because then you get to mentor people, and then you can actually have really decent conversations about teaching. So I did my senior fellowship in 2020, 2021, don't remember. But I immediately volunteered to be a mentor and stuck my hand up and went, can I come and do a session on the PG certs about international students? But the mentoring was really useful because then you're having meaningful conversations about teaching. Do you try to do, and in UCA they had to do these peer reviews as well. They had to submit lesson plans or teaching materials or observe and give feedback on those. So that's a really, really valuable way to have some impact, I think. I'd love to. I did offer many times bespoke sessions to departments, but again, staffing, sessional hours, getting everybody in the same room at the same time, that's not easy. And it depends very much on the, on buy-in from the program director, of course, right? So there are some who are more aware of these things than others. These are just some final thoughts. My line manager was really supportive in all of this because there was a lot in it for her. Made her look good. These are all the things I'm doing for internationalization. My team were really experienced. That was great. They were able to help and do a lot of the work with me. Where we had good links, like one with a couple of program directors in particular who were really supportive. The business school let me have free run, which was nice. We took over their induction. And it's really helpful as well to have somebody shout in your corner. I was on the academic board for a while, shout in your corner, fight in your corner, in higher places. I like that quote, cultural capital, from Ding. Having cultural capital, having visibility, having a bit of power in the institution. Because if we're siloed, then what can you do? All right, some references, lots of references. I'll finish referencing now. Thank you.